Hey, welcome back to my series on learning Maya for beginners. Last time we went over some very basic texturing using the AI standard surface shader to get a matte material, specular material, metallic material, and transparent material. Today we want to talk about lighting so that you can start lighting your scenes in a way that's going to be appealing and make these materials really shine. So first, you want to make sure that you set up a scene that has a ground plane. I've set up what I call this kind of photo backdrop, photographer's backdrop. So these are often used in things like product photography so that you get some nice kind of transition of light. I have turned on my resolution gate, which is this button right here, so that I can see the framing of my actual render. I don't have any lights in my scene, and I'm going to start by going to create lights and talk about the different lights that we have here. I'm going to skip the ambient light because that does kind of some different things than a realistic real world light might do. So I'm going to start with the directional light. So for this one, you'll see that this creates some arrows that point in one particular direction. If I press 7 on my keyboard, I'm going to get the kind of light preview mode so I can see what this light is doing. You'll notice if I move this light up or down or even side to side, nothing changes. And that's because the way this light works is as if in this direction, this giant wall, massive wall, bigger than you can even comprehend, infinite wall of light is coming evenly just from that direction. So moving that wall up or left or right really isn't going to make any difference. You'll also see that this light, changing the scale of it, won't change anything because it's just an infinite, massive wall of light in this direction. And I do see a lot of people making these very large, so it's very easy to kind of picture in your mind what this wall of light is actually doing. What will affect this light is the rotation. So as I start to change the rotation of this light, you'll see that this does affect how the direction of this wall of light is actually going to hit these objects. Now, as I open up my attribute editor with a light selected, I want to point out some settings that you can change within the light itself. So first of all, we have intensity. This is going to alter how bright the light is. So if I do a quick render here, you'll see that my light isn't super bright at this moment. So I might decide to go a little bit brighter here. Maybe I'll switch this to 2 and do another render. And you'll see that now I start getting a brighter light. You'll see what my shadows are doing now. You'll see how my objects are interacting essentially with this light. And this is kind of the best way to just start tweaking things and make it look better. Now, the next thing that you can do is adjust the color of the light itself. So there's 2 ways to adjust the color on a light. I'm going to go down to this Arnold tab, and I want to talk about color temperature. So if we click on Use Color Temperature, the color of the light is going to be based on a value that we put in the temperature. Every light that we have in our real world has a specific color temperature based on this Kelvin value. And a lot of times you'll just want to look these up. So if you go Google, the color temperature of the sun versus the moon versus a candle flame versus a LED light versus whatever it's going to be, you're going to get a different value here. And you'll see if I started to use this slider, my color is going to start getting really warm with a smaller value and really blue with a larger value. So if you have a very specific light that you're trying to use, you might want to just alter this value, and you'll see that you do get pretty different results based on what color you have. This is obviously going to give us a much more warm tone. And I have so many students who just leave these completely white. And every light they chuck in their scene, they use the light as if the only purpose of light is to see the scene so that I can see what these are looking like. But really the purpose of light, especially in animation and 3D graphics, is to create a mood, is to create a tone for the film. If you try to think of different genres like horror, for example, if you go see a horror movie, they tend not to use bright, warm light. They're going to use very, very harsh light in certain areas that create very dramatic shadows, a dark, cool, moody light. It's very specific to the genre, whereas if you're going to watch a romantic comedy, that's going to be super different. So what you do with the lights, how bright you make them, where you place them, what you do with the colors of them is dramatically going to influence how your scene feels and looks. So this is the color temperature, but we also have color up here. So if you double click into this, you could, go with a very, very dramatic color. What this is essentially doing is it's almost like a Christmas light, where if you picture that little plastic bulb, the bulb itself, the encasing of the light itself is tinted a specific color. If you go to the store and buy one of those Halloween, red lights or purple lights or whatever, that's essentially what this is doing. So it's not the temperature of the light itself that's causing the color. It's like putting a gel, if you've ever taken theater class, one of those gel color screens over a light where the light is now cutting through a specific color to get a result. So that's what this is going to do as a color. So real quick, exposure is going to increase kind of the intensity, the brightness as well. These kind of can work hand in hand, so you can play around with those. Samples is going to be the quality of the light. So sometimes you have to bump this up, especially if you're seeing some noise or artifacts in the shadows. And you can kind of play around with some of these other settings if you wish. So I'm going to go to the next light. Delete this directional, go to Create, Lights, and do a point light. This light, you'll see the position of the light is the main thing that affects kind of what it is. How this light works is you imagine a point in space and light will shine evenly in all directions from this point. The thing I compare this to most is a light bulb. If you've got a light bulb, it spreads evenly in all directions, sort of. I recognize, obviously, the metal part of the light bulb, the connector, is going to block the light in that direction. But that's sort of what this is doing. Another thing, like a candle flame, this would be a good light to use for something like that. Now, one thing that I want to point out with these lights in Arnold Render specifically, they're very, very, very dim just right out the gate. If you put, the directional light has some good value to it immediately, some intensity, some brightness to it immediately, but all the other ones kind of don't. So I've seen some people who will just crank the intensity super high to start seeing those. For me, I've found that I like to go to this Arnold tab and increase the exposure first. So maybe I'll bump this up to, sometimes I'll start with 5, sometimes I'll start with 10, and just kind of see how that looks. So adding a little bit of exposure to the light first so that I can start to see it. And then once I can kind of start to see the light, from there I tend to play around with the intensity. So at this point, now that I can kind of see my scene decently, maybe I want it to be this dark and moody, but if I do want it to be brighter, I would go with the intensity setting. Same thing, I can use color temperatures, colors, play around with all these other things, but you'll see that this gives me a very different result than my directional light had. It's diffusing into this background a little bit more, so I get a darker kind of effect. So that is our point light. Delete this one out. I just deleted a sphere instead. Delete the actual light out. And now we'll look at the next one. We have a spotlight. Okay, how this one works is we have a cone that is going to cast our light. Let's see if I can move this. There we go. And what's cool about this light is we have some settings like the cone angle, so we can increase or decrease, narrow or widen what this cone is doing. The penumbra, you'll see we can kind of soften those edges. The drop off is the transition of when it goes into shadow. And this is one where a lot of times you might be changing the color because using spotlights is, if you're in a theater setting, that's often what they'll do is have very different colors of gels that go over this. So this is another one where I tend to bump up our exposure to start out, get a look at what this is looking like. So there's our spotlight. Next one I'm going to look at is the area light. So for this one, you'll see that you have this square, and there's actually a line. I'm going to mess up my composition here, but there's a line that shows you the direction of how the light is shining, of which way the light is shining. and get this back a little bit. Now this, the position of it, the rotation of it, and also the scale of it is going to be affecting how this light works. You can make it so it's not a full square, more of a rectangle. I'm going to bump up the exposure on this one as well, so you can see what this light kind of does. What this one is doing is imitating, my exposure is maybe a little extreme right now, but you'll see that we actually get more square reflections out of this because it's going to reflect the shape of the light itself. So this is imitating one of those photographer lights, if you've seen those kind of box lights. I use this all the time. This is great for things like three-point lighting. This is great for putting in windows as the light that's shining through the window. So this is a very, very helpful one to use. Keep in mind you do have an option right here for normalize. This kind of is how the light is affected according to kind of the size and scale that you've done. So you'll see if I uncheck normalize, I want a lower exposure on this one because the size of the light now is more going to directly kind of affect how the light is produced. So this is brighter than it would have been had I unchecked this or left this normalize checked. Okay, so we're going to delete this one. I'm going to go to Arnold lights because we have some options. You'll see you also have an area light over here. So by default, you can just use the Arnold area light and it's incorporated into Arnold. The Sky Dome light just puts this giant dome around the scene and it spreads whatever color you have evenly over the whole scene. The reason that I want to bring this one up real quick is to talk about image-based lighting or HDR, using HDR images. So that stands for high dynamic range image. So right now, of course, this is just white. But if I click into the box here, this checkerboard door is what I call it, we open up our node so that I could, make this a checker pattern or add a fractal or noise to this. But I want to use a file. So I'm going to click into this folder and I'm going to navigate and find, just on my computer here, where I have saved out an HDR image and attach that to our scene. So what an HDR essentially is doing is it's going to wrap around this sphere, and now wherever we have light in this image, it's going to cast light into our scene. Keep in mind that this does have to be the .HDR image so that it can cast this light, but you'll see as I zoom in now, I can even see like the reflection of the TV in these. And the main reason for this is in a lot of our other renders, if I have a reflective surface, it's just reflecting like the black space of Maya, and it's not going to give me a very realistic result. Whereas this one, it's imitating kind of this whole surrounding environment and getting light and reflections from this so that we get a much more realistic render. This can be a useful thing, and this can be kind of a detriment to students because some students, they'll just go find an image and chuck it in, and they're not thinking about the mood and the tone that the image is creating. They're just like, oh, it looks more realistic, and therefore I'm satisfied. So these are generally used in things like VFX work. Let's see if I can pull up an image really quick. So we've got a mirror ball, or a VFX chrome ball here. And this is essentially how they composite a lot of VFX into live action film. So they'll take something like this on set so that they can get pictures. And I think someone has kind of the unwrapped version of it somewhere. Well, I saw it before, but basically this gets laid out in kind of this, oh yeah, there it is. Kind of this funky way that you then could wrap around a sphere so that the environment can cast light into a digital setting. So in a movie like Transformers, where you're trying to get digital robots into live action footage, this can be used to help get similar lighting onto the robots as you had on that actual day of filming on set. So that's pretty much what this is imitating here. Just a quick intro to image-based lighting so you understand this as a lighting option. Be cautious. Remember, you want to be in control of your lights. You want your lights to do precisely what your lights should do for the mood and tone of your animation or whatever it is you're trying to create. And while this does give us environment, think about if that environment even makes sense for what you have in a scene. And of course, if you're creating a scene, you're probably going to build your own environment. So you may not even need this. So this can be a very helpful tool, but it also can hinder some students. But I still want to go over what this is so that you can get an understanding. So that's all we're going to talk about with lighting today. Brief introduction to all those different lights, brief introduction to image-based lighting and using HDR images in your scenes. And we will continue with more texturing next time. So I'll see you later.